Hello and welcome to another live stream from the Permaculture podcast. Today I am sitting down to look at a couple of books that have recently come onto my radar and into my collection that I wanted to share with you. One of those things about permaculture and everything that we do is there are so many amazing authors writing about this subject, working in these spaces, and continuing to develop just all this great stuff for us. And unless you spend a lot of time in this space working on this material like I do, a lot of it can kind of be missed or potentially fall off your radar. And so today I wanted to look at a couple of books that I really recommend for permaculture practitioners, depending on where you are in your practice or your life, and kind of just walk through these different titles so you can see whether or not they would be a good fit for you and what it is that you're doing. The three books that I want to look at today are Earth Care, People Care, and Fair Share in Education, The Children in Permaculture Manual by Lusi, Alderslowe, Gaye, Amus, and Didi, Devapriya, The Permaculture Design Notes from Delvin, Solkinson, Grace Solkinson, Kimchi, Tamra, Griffiths, Annaliese, Hordern, and Dana Wilson, and then the ForagerChef's Book of Flora by Chef Alan Bergo. So the first of the books that's up on our for discussion today is Earth Care, People Care, and Fair Share in Education. I think this is a great book if you're interested in teaching children, particularly preschool through elementary. The book opens with a short approach to pedagogy or a way and method of teaching permaculture to children. If you've encountered environmental education in the past, much of this will sound familiar as it's a holistic approach to education with permaculture applied as both part of the process as well as the material that children will learn and what we'll be teaching to them. And this includes the ethics of permaculture and how children can care for earth, care for people, and create a fair share, along with immersing their whole being by engaging children's heads, hands, and hearts, all within a natural flow. After the opening, there are chapters on embedding permaculture principles into education and an exploration of both Bill Mollison and David Holmgren's permaculture principles, focusing on the core concepts and applying them to younger children. This is really great for kids who are in that preschool, 2 to 3 years old through 12 years old, and is how a lot of the material that you'll find is divided up. But after an introduction to the permaculture principles, we're provided with an overview of a Children in Permaculture curriculum. And that's a series of tables with the kinds of activities we can introduce across several broad categories, including things like introducing permaculture, living nature, design, and growing food. And then these are broken down into two distinct categories for kind of a preschool to kindergarten or first grade age group, and then a second grade through fifth or sixth grade. Following this general curriculum outline is a series of in-depth sample sessions, a plan that gives you 14 different points in each lesson to ensure that you're able to take a holistic approach to delivering the program. And some of the activities that they detail are things like biomimicry, and examining the food that we're eating and how we can reduce food waste, as well as introducing children to the forest. And what I like about that is not only do they look at the age appropriateness for any given lesson, but also discuss how long the lesson can take, as well as the size of the group to have for the activity. And from there, the book then ends with 3 chapters that provide us additional guidance on how to approach teaching in this way, additional ideas about how to apply the Children in Permaculture pedagogical approach, as well as how to organize or run our own events or conferences, as well as encouragement to head out into the world and teach. I found this book and really recommend it because I was looking at building my own curriculum for enrichment for permaculture parents and their school-aged children earlier this year, and so I was looking at the material that was out there already written that I might be able to look at and gain some inspiration from. But then when I found this, I realized that this is kind of exactly what I was looking to make. So rather than try to recreate something like this, I'd prefer to just recommend this title to you. In time, I'll probably still come back to this and develop some additional resources that can be used in concert with this, or maybe I'll use what they have there as a framework. But it's a fantastic book if you're interested in teaching children permaculture, whether you're a parent, guardian, someone in the school system, or just work with an organization that deals with children. One other thing that I will say about this book is that it can be read online, so you can find out more about it at childreninpermaculture.com. Take a look at it, see if it's something that you like, and then order a copy for your own library. In addition to mentioning the URL there, I have included links to this and all the other books mentioned in this stream in the notes for the video. Next up, we have the permaculture design notes from Delvin Solkinson, Grace Solkinson, Kimchi, Tamra Griffiths, Annaliese Hordern, and Dana Wilson. Several years ago, I read an earlier version of this book and wrote a blurb for it, and really like this as a way to, and really like that book as a way to expand our understanding of permaculture and as a good companion to some of the earlier materials that are so core and fundamental to our permaculture practices, like Permaculture Designer's Manual or David Holmgren's Permaculture Principles and Pathways Beyond Sustainability. And so with that kind of view of this earlier, less detailed version of the permaculture design notes, when I heard that Delvin and the team were kickstarting a new version, I immediately backed the project. And if you don't know Delvin, he was on the show last year, I think it was, to talk about how he's been exploring permaculture through the offerings of various teachers for well over a decade. In this time, he's traveled all over the world, taking permaculture design course after permaculture design course, enrolling in various advanced trainings as they were available, as well as pursuing several permaculture diplomas to sit down with as many permaculture teachers and organizations as possible to collect their shared wisdom. And I've got a physical copy of this here. Like, this is a big book. I mean, you can see this is quite a tome that Delvin put together, and it's just absolutely amazing how much is in here. It's 450 pages of content just covering the gamut of permaculture education. And so, like, working with a variety of other authors, Delvin and the team break the spectrum of permaculture education into three main sections: a permaculture design course curriculum, a series of practical skills, and then insights and ideas on how to teach permaculture more practically when it comes to, like, the advice of different permaculture teachers on creating a pedagogy of your own, which was something that I experienced in my teacher training many years ago when I went to Cottage Grove, Oregon, and studied with Jude Hobbs and Rico Zook and Andrew Millison. A large portion of that class was their recommendations on how you put a permaculture course together, from organizing it and how to fund it to what you would actually teach in the class and how to teach it. And so you have all of that kind of information here in the Permaculture Designer's Notes. And all of these, like, dozens and dozens of lessons within each of these sections with the insights and observations from all of these different authors. Jude Hobbs, who I studied with, is in here. Rosemary Morrow, who wrote The Earth User's Guide to Permaculture, which is one of the books that I highly recommend and is the book that I actually teach from when I teach a PDC. Earth User's Guide to Permaculture and David Holmgren's Principles and Pathways Beyond Sustainability are the books that are included in my students' curriculum and that I work from. Hey, Daring Danielle, thanks for hopping in and joining me this afternoon. But yeah, it's a fantastic book, and I think that the way that the information is shared kind of in this straightforward, easy to bring together method. I didn't change my slide. I've been talking about this book the entire time. The beauty of doing it live. But you have all of these, looking at cool climate species. We have all these different plants of interest and why they're of interest. And, that continues over here. We have a little quote from Frank Lloyd Wright that ties it all together. It's absolutely that's some sketches of all the different authors who came into this. And each of these are kind of put together. Like, here are some different things that we might consider when it comes to our class culture and creating a learning environment. As we have conversations about consent and what it means for us to have agreements when it comes to education and what we're doing as teachers, and understanding what the role of authority is in a classroom setting, even as we might engage in things like Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed. It's been a while since I've read that. I apologize if I got it wrong. But even as much as we may try to democratize the classroom, there is still kind of a position of authority that a teacher is in. And I've had conversations with some of my colleagues on what goes into creating a safe environment. And those kinds of ideas are in here. And it's a fabulous book that can provide all kinds of insights and ideas into where to take one's permaculture education. Danielle, as you're saying, you haven't taken a PDC. This book can guide a lot of where you might proceed with your personal education if you just want to do it on your own. I think that this is a good book of interest to every permaculture practitioner. But if you're someone who is teaching permaculture, who would like to teach permaculture, this is something that I think that everyone should have in their kit. It's just a great book for all of these ideas, and the way that everything is presented. 1 or 2 or 3 pages of information on, one really narrowly focused idea, and lists and quotes and all of this makes it really easy for you to take what's there and remix it and apply it to your life exactly where you are, however you need to do it. Whatever you're working on. I could sit here right now and probably open one of these pages, read through it for a few minutes, and be able to do a live lesson right here with you. The information is that useful. I don't think that it stands alone on its own without some other support material, but it is fantastic for helping one put together a curriculum and to teach permaculture, both as a PDC and what you might follow up with if you wanted to create your own teacher training, or if you wanted to offer a series of classes and workshops on practical skills within the realm of permaculture. As with the Earth Care, People Care, and Fair Share in Education, the Permaculture Design Notes is another book that you can read online and decide if it's a good fit for you before ordering a copy of your own. You'll find Permaculture Design Notes at permaculturedesign.earth. And again, the link to that and the other books should be in the show notes for this. Danielle, while I finish up the presentation proper, would you like to tell me a little bit more about the kinds of classes that you would like to take? Whether that's a PDC or other specific topics within the realm of permaculture? I might be able to do a live stream like that, or maybe we could do a webinar together, or if you wanted to, we could sit down and do something one-on-one, depending on what your specific interests or needs are. And the final book, which I will switch slides to. Oh, and also anyone who's with us here at the moment, if you have any questions about these books or anything else regarding permaculture, feel free to drop a comment in the chat, and I will respond to that as we round out this video. So the last book that I wanted to bring up today was a recent release from my friends at Chelsea Green, the ForagerChef's book of Flora from Chef Alan Bergo. Alan's been foraging foods in the American Midwest for many years and bringing what he finds from the field into the kitchen and then serving it to the table. And then he takes all of those experiences and shares them with us in this book. And I mean, you see the cover there, but it's filled throughout with a lot of his own pictures of the different foods and different ways that you can like mix and remix what it is that you're making. Gets into like how to pickle knotweed, how to use milkweed, including cornmeal fried milkweed pods, making milkweed shoots Milanese, and just lots and lots of recipes. And it's a gorgeous book. And overall, he's divided it into 4 main sections, looking at greens, bitter and sweet, vegetables, wild and tame, herbs, flowers, and alliums, and then finishes with nuts, grains, and starches. And as that title on vegetables implies, wild and tame, he shares recipes for all of these foods, whether we forage them fresh or happen to grow something domesticated in the garden. And I really find that helpful because we can take what we find in this book and apply it already to what it is that we may be cooking. And many of these recipes are the kinds of things that kind of provide you like a master recipe approach that, again, with many of these ideas, we can remix and try something different in our kitchen, but also with a great variety of wild foods that we can be foraging and harvesting from the landscape. And I was initially drawn to this book because there are many books on how and what to forage across a number of biomes and regions of the world, but taking what we find and turning it into something we actually want to eat are relatively few and far between in comparison. I think I've probably interviewed more foraging teachers over the years and talked about their books than I've ever had people who are cooking on the show. And so, you know, how do we do that? And if you're not feeling really comfortable with your cooking skills or things like that, there are so many great authors now who are creating books that provide us with a way to turn what we find into something that is going to be lovely, served as part of a meal. And, you know, with some of the earlier books that I've encountered that kind of started making me search for books like the ForagerChef's Book of Flora are Dina Falcone's Foraging and Feasting, or now the various titles from Pascal Baldar. I think he might be up to 3 titles now, on the different ways that we can turn wild foods from something of subsistence into cuisine. And so if you have and like any of the titles from Dina or Pascal, I think you'll really enjoy Alan's and want to add it to your collection. And as I say, you can find the ForagerChef's Book of Flora at chelseagreen.com. And so, hey, Danielle, Garden of Whedon, thanks. Oh. And so I guess we'll go ahead and move into a bit of Q&A here. As I say, if there's anything you want to drop into the chat, we can look at that here at the end. Let me move back to my main feed here since we're done with the books. Okay, so Daniel, you say the KNF principles. I take it that that's Korean natural farming. My main exposure to that was an interview that I did last year on putting together our own. It was Nigel Palmer and I were talking about different ways that we could create a lot of our own like fertigation and things like that. So that was my own first exposure to Korean natural farming. I was going to say Kentucky natural farming, and that's not right. So if you haven't read Nigel's book, I would really recommend checking out his work and the way that he dives into that for the kinds of things that you might be working on in your landscape. If you would like to talk one-on-one about some things and maybe put together a mentoring program. That's something that I'm offering now, to be able to help people develop their own programs for these kinds of things. I don't feel that a permaculture design course is necessarily required for everyone to have the life that they want to live. If you want a permaculture design certificate because of the host of things that it has to offer, I think it's wonderful to go through the process. It's also an amazing networking experience to sit down and spend time with people working on, your one's permaculture education. Oh, Nathan, thanks for hopping in. That's great. You mentioned Steve Brill. I didn't know that he had a cookbook. Do you know the title of that? Most of my work with him when we did the interview and such was about introducing children to foraging. But yeah, Danielle, if you want to drop me an email at show@thepermaculturepodcast.com, I'd be more than happy to, send you some material and other things so that we can talk about different directions that you might want to go, as well as seeing if, I can dig into my resources and see what permaculture design courses are being offered in Oregon. I know that Oregon State University and my old instructor, Andrew Millison, teach one online, but I don't know if that's the experience that you're looking for. And so I can dig in a bit more, like I say, and search through my resources and see what's available. Teresa Marone. Okay, I'll have to look that up, Nathan, and see about her work and adding that to my list of resources. Yeah. But in the time that we have here with everyone who's on, do you have any thoughts or questions that you'd like to share here in the chat before I drop my my various social media feeds and the announcement about when the next live stream will be? So because there is a bit of a delay between the video and the chat, I'll go ahead and drop these out here. If you're interested, I should say that Nathan Carlos Rupley, who is in the chat with us right now, is a great forager who I know personally and has been on the Permaculture podcast as a guest. Check out his work on YouTube. I apologize, I don't have the link on hand to drop into the chat, but if you search for his work, he's done some great material, both articles and videos, and a lot of other work on making foraging super accessible for people. When we ran the first year of the Mid-Atlantic Permaculture Convergence, he came down and led a weed walk, which I think was our most popular class that day, which was kind of impromptu. I will never give out enough props to you, Nathan, for all the work that you've done. I've always found it wonderful and really enjoyed it. And if it's fair to say, I think that I think of you as one of my mentors when it comes to wild spaces, wild food, and nature connection, for all that you've done. So real quick, let me drop these. If you're catching this conversation live, please feel free to drop over to the Patreon for the podcast and support the show, join in the community. I do weekly updates that give some information about the direction of the show. There's a community Discord that's available for Patreon listeners. I give discounts on some of my offerings, such as consultations and meanderings and the storytelling for personal transformation class. There's a monthly AMA for Patreon supporters, and just all kinds of other stuff winds up there. If you'd like to join me and check that out. Also, if you'd like to, you can find me on Twitter at PermaculturePod or on Instagram at PermaculturePodcast. I try to reshare largely other people's information and give folks a heads up of what's going on, if you want to follow me there and join in those conversations. And so, with your questions, Danielle, let me see, I saw two go by. What's the missing topic that needs to be discussed in the permaculture community? For me right now, it's land access. Above and beyond, I think that we need to be having some deep conversations about why land is hard for people to gain access to, and all the different ways that um, we need to be talking deeply about the systems that exist that keep people off the land or that continue to make it more and more expensive, and why growing food on land is one of the least valuable things you can do with it. And I've got a series that I'm working on right now that will be coming out later this year that at the moment is a little American centric, discussing some of the policies and practices that have made permaculture, or that have made access to land so difficult for folks over the years. And in exploring that and talking with people who have really studied that and researched it, there's a whole lot of systemic practices that are engaged, that have gone into that make it hard for first time farmers or first generation farmers or permaculture practitioners be able to do this work that is so vital, that has the possibility to, break apart the issues of food deserts and make nutritional food accessible to people. Um, and yeah, in talking with folks like Sarah K. Mock, who is an agricultural reporter and recently wrote the book Farm and Other F Words, which is, I haven't read yet, but from the reviews that are coming in is fantastic. Or my recent interview, and both of these are featured in the upcoming series on urban permaculture and agriculture. Um, I talked to Sarah about that, and so we were talking about intergenerational wealth and the transfer of land, and how wealthy many farmers are, and how that actually pushes back. Sarah's work pushes back against the narrative about how many farmers are actually poor when they're not, because the land that they have access to is worth millions of dollars, and the food that they produce in the commodity market is, very often they have a price guarantee regardless of what the price in the marketplace might be. And it's been fantastically revealing for me to have those conversations, as well as sitting down with Amy Rose Full of the Virginia Free Farm and learning from her about some of the systemic practices that she's encountered that keeps land inaccessible, and then the ways that we can work with nonprofits and public-private partnerships in order to gain access to land, the ways that we can, maybe do some things where we ask forgiveness rather than look at, that we're better to beg forgiveness than ask permission. And she really dove into a lot of different ways we can engage the political system. So that's one of the things that, for me right now, is probably one of the biggest ones. Also because land access touches on so much of the social sphere of permaculture and our engagement that really deals with earth care, people care, and, well, return of surplus or fair share, by engaging in those spaces and having those conversations about the systems in place that are difficult. Yeah. And then from there, for me, what is the most important permaculture principle? I I don't know that any one of them is can or should be elevated above what it above any of the others. I do, with that said, I do think that the principle to start with is observe and interact. If I'm going to pull from David Holmgren's perspective, and for me, that's because observation is where so much of this begins. In our landscape, it tells us where resources are going to be available, where the sun is going to shine, where the rain will fall, where water will collect. In our social environments, it's the space where we can learn what's needed, where we can engage with the organizations that are around us that are already doing good work, where we can begin to get involved and see who the leaders are. and learn more about what's going on through that practice of observation. And it's also for many people an easy way to get them started in what it is that we're doing. We can immerse people in nature by just getting them out there and starting their observations of what they see around them. And yeah, and a lot of what builds on that observation, but also then the call to interact, and that we need to take action with whatever it is that we have, or however we can, in order to bring a lot of these ideas into the world. That it's not a matter of like just sitting and thinking about these things or creating design after design after design, but making ourselves and the work that we do available in whatever ways we can. And I think that through like observation and some of the techniques that we have when it comes to a needs and yields assessment, and like bring some of the other pieces together about like our personal observation, it also provides us a better space to work from. In my early permaculture practices, I wasn't super into the idea of the smaller zones, like, you know, our home being a zone 0 or our self being 0, 0. But the more that I've gone through these practices over the years, I've found that a lot of this work does start with ourself. And so that the better we're able to understand what our strengths are and our ability to apply many of or much of the knowledge that we have, that it makes us more effective as permaculture practitioners. We don't fight against what's difficult in our lives. So anyway, that's kind of like a broad overview of like where that question leads me in the moment and where my thinking currently is. Let me check in on the chat. Yeah, Danielle, if you'd like to learn more about, or anyone who's listening, if you'd like to learn more about the Storytelling for Personal Transformation class, I made some adjustments to that recently so that it is an ongoing course for anyone who wants to sign up. If you want to reach me by email, show@thepermaculturepodcast.com, I can give you some more information and a breakdown on that. Let me see. Garden of Whedon, I reckon needs emphasized repeatedly. Yeah, I think conservation for regenerate versus regeneration is definitely a big part of our conversation as permaculture practitioners. What goes through my head in the moment is that like sustainability and conservation are terms that have been very popular for a long time, but the way that it kind of breaks down is that conservation and sustainability kind of become self-limiting concepts. And so when we look at the conversation talking about regenerative agriculture, is about not only being able to maintain what we have, but create something that is greater than the current moment. And yeah, if you would like to dig into some of those ideas, I recommend Dow Orion's book. Let me see. I apologize. Dow Orion wrote Beyond the War on Invasive Species. I believe that's her title. Let me double check. Yes, Beyond the War on Invasive Species, a permaculture approach to ecosystem restoration, is probably one of the better books that I've read in the last couple of years on this idea. The other place that you might dig into, I have a video here on YouTube that is a site tour with my friend and colleague Wilson Alvarez of his work on doing mimicking the ecosystem engineers that used to exist in North America and using their influences and the way that they would change the landscape in order to restore some landscape at the Horn Farm Center in York County, Pennsylvania, which, yeah, like Wilson has done some really amazing work in that way as well, that talks about like the ways that we can practice as permaculture practitioners with fairly low-tech tools to create quite a lot of change within the environment in those like zone 4 and zone 5 kind of areas. And yeah, that video is on here, and we just kind of did a walking tour, and he showed us a lot of the different pieces that he was working on. And it is something that when we have those kinds of conversations, because of the political sphere that a lot of this is dealing with. What you have in the West, Danielle, is completely different from what we have here in the East Coast. Um, Much of the land here on the East compared to the West, like east of the Mississippi, much of the land is in private ownership. And then the further west you go, the more that it is in the hands of the federal government and the state governments. Similar, from what I understand, in Canada, same thing with what's referred to as the Crown lands. Somewhere around 90%, I don't have the figure off the top of my head, but like 90% of the land in Canada is owned by the state, the nation, and the provinces within Canada. So, yeah, there's a lot there. Um, and so, like, the way that you engage in those spaces is completely different, because here's a permaculture practitioner, I have to be finding the individual private stakeholders who are holding on to a lot of that land and speak with them about like what we can do to regenerate. What we can, and then in the West, you're looking at, yeah, BLM and the Department of the Interior. You're looking at the interior or natural resource departments of each of the states, the environmental protection agency within each state, and the way that each of those state and federal actors work are completely different. I do have some experience like advocating for better policies. And so if you'd like kind of an outline or a strategy for that, that's something that I can dig into. Um, it's kind of like guerrilla political engagement. And, but a lot of it is about like find out who the stakeholders are, find out who the gatekeepers are, find out who the people are who are actually in control of a lot of these policies. Because you may find that even though there's a head of a department or something, that their decisions are being made by someone else in their organization. And it's finding out who that person is and how they handle these kinds of processes. And it's also like with the conversation that's going on with the chat regarding fire, I go back to thinking about the different ways that indigenous groups in the various areas where we live, from Australia to Oregon, to here where Nathan and I are in the East, about how they handled much of the landscape with fire, and like looking to those kinds of practices, because as far as we know, they were sustainable for thousands of years. And there is research that you can point policyholders to about how to use fire in various ways. And I did a series with Matt Fiddler on wildfires and designing for disasters. The video I popped back up on YouTube. And that would be something to look at as well. Matt breaks down a lot of the issues within California specifically. And I again go back to, that permaculture and a lot of what we work on is a regional specific or area specific approach to how we handle this. And that we can start a lot of these practices in our own backyard, create experiences so that people can see what these look like in practice, and then be able to grow and build upon them. I've heard of Finisia Medrano, but I forget who mentioned her work in some of our interviews. I don't know if that might have been Peter Michael Bauer. I'd heard that she was kind of polarizing in various ways, but I'm not deeply familiar with her work. I don't know how you feel about Mcat Anderson's Tending the Wild and the material that's in there. It's been a long time since I've read it, and I'm still trying to, I'm waiting for her to retire from working in government, because Kat Anderson has agreed to an interview, but not while she's working in that space. Yeah. Yeah. But I thank everybody for being here today, and what you shared in the chat has been great to kind of discuss with you. If you're catching this as a recording, check out what folks had to say and where they're at. I tried to give voice to all of that while we were speaking. From here, I'm going to do another one of these live streams next Tuesday, July 20th at 4 p.m. Eastern, which will be then 1 p.m. Pacific, and I think 7 p.m. GMT. I don't know what the topic's going to be yet. Maybe I'll pull a couple more books from my library to review, or if you'd like to discuss something else, feel free to drop a question or a topic in the chat or in the show notes. I'd be more than happy to address anything that you'd like. Oh, a couple more coming in on the chat. Big conservation zones. From Garden of Whedon, I think I was hearing that Biden was going to have big conservation zones. I've heard that as well, but I don't know how much that's going to be creating new ones or just making sure that the policies that are in place are properly protecting the ones that already exist. It's something I'll be digging into the more that those kinds of things pop up on my radar, and see where they go, and can certainly share more about that as it comes online. Yeah, a lot of the work that I've seen just seems to be coming through like executive actions and pieces like that. I've not had any legislation forwarded my way about what's going on, but I will look into that a bit further and find out what's been announced. But awesome, everybody. Thank you so much for being a part of this and coming out on, well, the various times that each of you were available to do this. Garden of Whedon, thanks for being able to tune in from, coming in from Australia. And if there's any time that you'd like to collaborate, feel free to drop me a message. I'm always interested in ways that we can help each other promote what we would do and be able to work together. So yeah, thanks everybody, and we'll do this again soon. Oh yeah, just over a week from now. Woo! Oh. And then